It always starts with a warning, not the kind you find written on signs or spoken with authority, but the kind that slips out in hushed tones, almost embarrassed, as though the speaker fears that saying it too loudly might give it power. He heard it from a friend of a friend, over drinks, in a half-lit bar where secrets clung to the air like smoke. The man leaned closer, his voice barely audible over the murmur of conversation. "Don't stay alone in that house after midnight. People don't last long there." At first, he laughed. Who wouldn't? Haunted houses were stories for children, entertainment for tourists on ghost tours, not something that lived and breathed in real neighborhoods. Yet there was something about the way the man's eyes shifted as he spoke, how they darted to the shadows in the corners of the room, that planted a seed of unease. The warning was brief, but the silence that followed it stretched longer than it should have, like a pause filled with memories too heavy to retell. He dismissed it that night. Fear was a luxury he didn't allow himself. Not after all he had endured in the city. He was looking for peace, for solitude, for a place where no one would knock on his door at odd hours or scream in the alleyways below his window. The house on Brookside Lane promised all of that. It was cheap, quiet, and standing empty for years. Too perfect, really, though he ignored that thought as quickly as it came. Still, when he signed the papers and held the keys in his palm, the warning echoed in his mind. Don't stay alone after midnight. He told himself it was nonsense, but as he drove toward the house, night falling in the rearview mirror, he couldn't shake the chill that crept up his spine. It wasn't the kind of warning you could forget. It was the kind that lingers, waiting, like a shadow that follows you no matter how fast you walk. The house stood at the far end of Brookside Lane, where the road narrowed into a forgotten stretch lined with crooked trees. From a distance, it looked ordinary, unremarkable, even a relic of a different era, when families still gathered on porches and children played in yards until the sun dipped below the horizon. Its paint had once been white, though years of neglect had reduced it to a dull gray, peeling like the shedding skin of something long dead. The shutters flapped restlessly in the wind, and the front porch sagged as if bowing under a weight invisible to the eye. In daylight, he could almost convince himself it was simply old, nothing more. The kind of house you pass without giving it a second glance. But the longer he stared, the more it seemed to change. Its windows, dark and expressionless, didn't reflect the sky like they should have. Instead, they seemed to absorb light, as though the house itself resented being seen. When the wind carried through the nearby trees, the house groaned in reply, as if its bones remembered every storm, every secret it had swallowed. Neighbors, what few there were, kept their distance. Curtains closed quickly when he drove past, and no one stopped to welcome him. No one waved. It was as though the house existed in its own bubble of silence, set apart from the world around it. Even animals avoided it. The yard was overrun with weeds and brittle grass, but no birds landed on the roof. No stray cats prowled along the porch. It was a dead zone, and yet it pulsed with something unseen. The closer he walked toward it, the heavier his chest felt. The air seemed thicker on Brookside Lane, clinging to his skin, damp and cool even under the afternoon sun. Standing at the bottom of the porch steps, he gripped the railing, and the wood gave a faint groan beneath his touch. It wasn't just rot. It was as if the house itself acknowledged him, recognized him, and was quietly deciding whether it would allow him inside. He turned the key, the metal cold, despite the warmth of the day, and as the lock clicked open, a gust of stale air rushed past him. It smelled faintly of dust, of mold, and of something else, something older, something metallic, almost like blood. He paused, keys trembling in his hand, before forcing the door wide. The house on Brookside Lane opened its mouth to him, and for the first time, he felt what the warning had tried to tell him. This was not a place to be lived in. This was a place that devoured. The first night in the house was supposed to be a fresh beginning. He had packed only the essentials, a mattress, a few boxes of clothes, and his laptop. The emptiness of the rooms echoed with every step, as though the house itself was mocking how little life he brought into it. Dust clung to the corners like cobwebs of time, and the air felt heavy, as if the walls had not breathed in years. He tried to laugh it off. After all, old houses creaked. Old houses held strange smells, but old houses weren't supposed to watch. At first, it was the silence that unnerved him. In the city, there had always been noise sirens in the distance, neighbors arguing, cars rumbling past his window. Here, the stillness was absolute, like the world outside had been cut away. He lay on the mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the oppressive quiet press against his ears. The ticking of his wristwatch sounded unnaturally loud, each second stabbing into the silence like a metronome marking the countdown to something unseen. The clock neared midnight. He turned on his side, pulling the blanket tighter around himself, and that was when he noticed it. The silence wasn't natural. It wasn't peace. It was absence, absence so deliberate it felt alive. The wind outside had stopped. The trees had stilled. Even the insects that usually sang through the night were gone. It was as if the air itself had taken a deep breath and refused to exhale. At 11:57 p.m., he sat up. His skin prickled with gooseflesh though the night was warm. Every instinct screamed that something was about to happen. He rubbed his face, laughed nervously, and whispered to himself that he was being ridiculous. But his voice sounded strange in the room, like it didn't belong to him anymore, like the walls were swallowing the sound before it could fade. When midnight struck, he felt it an almost imperceptible shift, like the house had awakened. The floorboards groaned somewhere deep within, followed by a long, drawn-out sigh that could not have been the wind. His breath caught. He wanted to move, to rationalize, but his body was frozen. The silence deepened, dense and suffocating, and in it he swore he heard the faintest whisper, not loud enough to understand, but loud enough to know. He was not alone. The first sound came at precisely 12:03 a.m. He knew the time, because he had been staring at the clock on his phone, desperate for sleep, watching the minutes crawl past. At first, he thought it was his imagination, a faint creak, like the groan of old, wood settling under pressure. But then, it came again louder, more distinct. The unmistakable cadence of footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and heavy, as though whoever walked the hall upstairs carried a weight they could not put down. His heart seized in his chest. He had locked the front door. The windows were shut. There was no way anyone could be inside. And yet, someone was. The rhythm of the steps echoed above him, moving from one side of the hallway to the other. The boards complained beneath invisible feet, each groan of wood sharper than the last, slicing into the silence. He sat frozen on his mattress, his throat dry, his body screaming at him to run but refusing to obey. The sound wasn't random. It wasn't the aimless protest of an old house. This was measured, purposeful, like someone pacing, waiting. He tried to rationalize. Maybe it was the pipes. Maybe the house shifted with the night air. But deep down, he knew. Pipes didn't walk. Houses didn't pace. And the sound was too clear, too precise. It was footsteps. He could have counted each one if he dared. The steps grew closer, inching toward the far end of the hall. Then they stopped. The silence that followed was far worse. A suffocating pause that pressed on his eardrums like a weight. He didn't dare breathe. He stared at the ceiling, every nerve alight with terror. For a moment, he convinced himself it was over, that maybe it had been nothing at all. And then came the shift. The footsteps began again, softer this time, dragging as though whoever was up there knew he was listening. They moved directly above his room, each creak synchronized with the hammering of his heart. Then, silence, a pause that stretched into forever. And just as he allowed himself a trembling breath, the final sound reached him. One more step, slow and heavy. Stopping right outside his bedroom door, he stared at the door, his body paralyzed, every muscle tensed like a coiled spring. The silence on the other side pressed against him, so heavy that even the faint hum of his own breathing felt intrusive. Then, without warning, it came the sharp metallic rattle of the door handle. The sound shattered the stillness like breaking glass. The knob trembled violently, turning half an inch, then stopping, as though an unseen hand was testing it, toying with the lock. He couldn't look away. The pale silver glint of the metal caught the thin beam of moonlight snaking through his curtains, flickering as it moved. His heart pounded so violently in his chest, he thought it might burst. Each beat echoed in his ears, drowning out reason, leaving only primal fear. He wanted to scream, to shout that whoever it was should leave him alone, but his voice was trapped in his throat, crushed under the weight of terror. All he could do was listen as the knob twisted again, this time with more force, as if whoever or whatever was on the other side was losing patience. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The rattling stopped, replaced by silence so profound it made him wish the noise would return. Silence meant waiting. Silence meant watching. He leaned forward, barely breathing, as if the smallest sound might provoke it. His eyes blurred with tears he hadn't realized were forming, but he refused to blink. If he looked away for even a second, something would happen. He knew it. Then came the worst moment of all. A slow, deliberate scrape, the sound of fingernails dragging down the wood just beside the knob. The vibration carried through the door, into the room, into his bones. His stomach twisted. It wasn't an intruder. No burglar would waste time scratching at doors. This was something else. Something that wanted him to know it was there. He whispered to himself, over and over, "It's not real. It's not real. It's just the house. Just the house." But even as he said it, he knew he was lying. Old houses creaked. Old houses sighed. But old houses did not grip door handles. They did not scratch. They did not wait. For what felt like hours, nothing happened. The knob rested still. The scratching ceased, and silence returned. But it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of a predator crouched in the dark, patient and calculating. And as he lay there, shaking beneath his blanket, he realized something far more terrifying than the footsteps or the rattling knob. It didn't want to come in yet. It wanted him to know. By the third night, he no longer pretended that the house was ordinary. The first night had left him trembling. The second had stolen his sleep. And now the third felt like a test one. He wasn't sure he would survive. He kept every light on, desperate to carve out an island of safety in the ocean of darkness, pressing against the walls. Lamps glowed in every corner, casting shadows that seemed too long, too sharp. Even so, the house remained heavy, as though it resented the intrusion of light. He had pulled the curtains tight, refusing to give the night outside a chance to look in. The memory of the rattling doorknob clung to him like a fever, and his mind repeated the same mantra. Light means safety. Light means safety. Yet safety was a lie. Deep down, he felt that the house wanted him awake, exhausted, fraying at the edges of sanity. It was 2:15 a.m. when he saw it. A shift, a movement that didn't belong. The curtain nearest his bed rippled, though the air was still. His breath caught. Slowly, the fabric pressed inward, as if something leaned against it from the other side. At first it was faint, barely noticeable, but within seconds, the outline became unmistakable. A tall, human-like silhouette, shoulders squared, head tilted just enough to suggest it was staring directly at him. He couldn't move. His chest tightened as his eyes locked on the figure, every instinct screaming at him to run. But his body betrayed him. The shape remained perfectly still, frozen against the thin fabric, darker than the night itself. For one horrifying moment, he imagined pulling the curtain aside and finding not a face, but an empty void staring back. Summoning every ounce of willpower, he forced himself to stand. His legs shook as he crossed the room, his hand trembling as it reached for the curtain. He told himself he had to look. If he didn't, then not knowing would consume him more than the truth ever could. With a violent tug, he ripped the curtain open. Nothing. The yard outside stretched empty under the pale wash of moonlight. The grass shimmered with dew. The trees swayed lazily in the breeze. No figure, no intruder, no explanation. And yet his skin prickled. His lungs refused to relax, because he could still feel it. That weight, that gaze, the certainty that something had been there and had only slipped away the moment he dared to look. He shut the curtain again, retreating to the farthest corner of the room, where the light seemed weakest. Sleep was impossible now. The house wasn't just inside with him, it was outside too, circling, pressing, waiting. Watching him from the dark dot, it began so faintly that he thought it was nothing more than exhaustion playing tricks on his ears. After all, 3 nights without rest had left his thoughts ragged, his senses frayed. But as he lay there in the dim, oppressive glow of the lamps, he realized the sound wasn't coming from inside his head. It was seeping into the room, curling like smoke through invisible cracks in the walls. A whisper low, deliberate, and intimate, as though someone had pressed their lips directly against his ear. At first, he couldn't understand the words. They slipped past him like water, too soft to catch. But the tone was undeniable. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't kind. It carried with it the weight of warning, the hiss of something ancient and hateful. His breath caught as the sound grew clearer, shaping itself into words he could no longer deny. "You should have left." The voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to slice through him. His body went rigid, every hair on his arms rising, as if his skin itself recoiled from the message. He clutched the blanket tighter, though it offered no protection. The whisper repeated, again and again, steady as a heartbeat. "You should have left. You should have left." He sat up, scanning the room with wild, desperate eyes. The corners were empty. The curtains lay still. The door remained shut. And yet the voice was there, surrounding him, filling the silence between his racing heartbeats. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. He covered his ears, pressing his palms so tightly that pain blossomed, but it didn't matter. The voice wasn't heard, it was inside. Sweat rolled down his back as panic surged. He muttered to himself, anything to drown it out. It's not real, it's not real, it's not real. But the whisper only grew angrier, louder, as if feeding off his denial. The words twisted, overlapping, until they were no longer a warning but a condemnation. You didn't leave, you stayed, you belong to me. By now he was shaking uncontrollably, his breaths ragged and shallow. He stumbled to the far wall, pressing his back against the peeling plaster, desperate to escape the sound. But the whisper followed, hissing against his ear no matter where he moved. It was alive, crawling with him, clinging to him, filling every empty space the light couldn't reach. And just when he thought he couldn't endure another moment, the whisper stopped. The silence that replaced it was suffocating, louder than any scream. He collapsed onto the mattress, his body trembling, his throat raw from the sob he hadn't realized he'd released. But deep down, he knew. The whisper had only paused. It wasn't done with him. It was waiting for the moment when he was weakest, most alone, so it could speak again, closer, crueler, and with words that would leave no doubt. He had already made the biggest mistake of his life the moment he stepped into this house. By the fourth night, sleep was no longer a possibility. His body begged for it, his eyelids heavy, his muscles aching, his thoughts slow and broken. But every time he drifted near unconsciousness, something pulled him back. A sound, a shadow, a whisper too faint to ignore. The house wouldn't let him rest. It wanted him weak. It wanted him to unravel. He had stopped eating. The untouched remains of canned food sat on the counter, congealed and cold, because the kitchen felt wrong. The lights flickered there more than anywhere else, and sometimes, in the reflection of the window above the sink, he thought he saw movement behind him when no one was there. Hunger gnawed at him, but fear gnawed harder. He couldn't leave his bedroom for long, not when the hall outside creaked with phantom footsteps, not when the doorknob still rattled at odd hours, mocking him with the promise of intrusion. His phone lay on the floor beside him, drained of battery days ago. He hadn't charged it, he hadn't dared. The idea of plugging it into the outlet, of connecting himself to the house in any way, made his skin crawl. He wanted contact, wanted to call for help, but he also knew that if someone answered, the voice that came through the speaker might not be human. The nights bled into each other, indistinguishable, stitched together by an endless thread of fear. His face hollowed, his hands shook uncontrollably, and his thoughts looped in frantic circles. Every noise was a threat. The groan of wood, the hiss of wind, the hum of electricity. Every shadow stretched too far, leaned too close. He no longer trusted his eyes, but worse, he no longer trusted his mind. Once, in the dead hour between midnight and dawn, he thought he saw a figure crouched in the corner of his room. Pale skin, bent limbs, eyes blacker than the shadows surrounding it. He screamed until his throat burned. But when he blinked, the corner was empty. Yet the echo of that image clung to him, poisoning the silence. He sat with his back pressed against the wall, arms wrapped around his knees, rocking like a child. Tears streaked his face, though he didn't remember crying. Every few minutes, the whisper returned, slithering into his ear. You should have left. He no longer argued. He knew it was right. He knew he should have run the moment he crossed the threshold. But the cruelest truth of all was beginning to sink in. It wasn't the house that wouldn't let him leave. It was himself. The terror had bound him here, rooted him like a prisoner chained to invisible walls. And as dawn approached, weak grey light creeping through the curtains, he realized the night had not ended. It never did. The sun might rise, but inside the house, darkness was eternal. By the seventh night, he was barely human. His eyes were sunken hollows, ringed with purple shadows, his lips cracked from thirst, his skin clammy with cold sweat. He no longer bothered with food, no longer pretended he would ever sleep again. The house had stripped him of dignity, of reason, of hope. What remained was raw, trembling survival, and even that was slipping. That night, the air felt different from the moment the sun fell, thicker, heavier. It clung to him like wet cloth, choking and relentless. The lights flickered more violently than before, buzzing with a low, insect-like hum. He tried to turn on every lamp, every bulb, but still the corners seemed to swell with darkness, thick and hungry. The house was restless. It wanted something, and he knew with bone-deep certainty that it would not wait any longer. At midnight, the footsteps began again, not the measured pacing of before, but heavier, more urgent, as though whatever stalked the halls no longer cared to hide its presence. The sound rattled the floorboards, making the walls tremble, shaking dust loose from the ceiling. His body tensed, heart thundering, as the steps descended the stairs. This time they weren't staying upstairs, they were coming for him. He stumbled to the front door, panic tearing through his veins. His fingers clawed at the lock, fumbling, trembling, desperate, but the door resisted. The deadbolt turned halfway, then stuck fast, as though welded into place. He cursed, sobbing, pulling with every ounce of strength, but the lock refused to yield. The house wasn't letting him go. Behind him, the whisper had returned, no longer soft, no longer distant. It was a roar now, a chorus of voices overlapping, screaming the words that had haunted him all week. You should have left, you should have left, you should have left. The sound filled every inch of the room, vibrating through his skull until he thought it would split him apart. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. He could hear them crossing the living room, slow and deliberate, the sound of weight pressing into the old wood, closer and closer. He pounded on the door with both fists, shrieking for help, his voice raw, but no one came. No one ever came. Then a pause that lasted just long enough for him to hope. He turned his head, tears streaking his face, and saw it, a shadow darker than the dark itself, stretching across the floor, growing longer, larger, until it reached his feet. He couldn't scream, couldn't breathe, could only stand frozen as icy fingers, impossibly cold, impossibly real, curled around his throat from behind. The last thing he felt was the weight of that grip tightening, dragging him backward into the dark. The house on Brookside Lane still stands. Its shutters hang crooked, its paint peeled away in long curling strips. The grass in the yard has grown wild, tall and yellowed, swaying in the wind like brittle bones. To the casual passerby, it is nothing more than another abandoned home, one of countless others left to rot in quiet neighborhoods. But to those who live nearby, the house is not forgotten. It is avoided, it is feared. Neighbors whisper about it in hushed tones, lowering their voices even in daylight. They say that sometimes, if you walk past the house just after midnight, the windows don't look empty, they look alive. You can see a figure pressed against the glass, face pale and drawn, eyes wide with unending terror. He never moves, never blinks. He only stares, as though silently begging anyone to free him. But those who look too long say the figure changes. One night it may be tall, another hunched, another faceless, always watching, always waiting. Children dare each other to approach the porch, but none make it past the first step. The wood groans under their weight, as though protesting their presence, and the air grows thick, heavy, wrong. They run before they can knock, swearing they heard something. Footsteps above them, whispers in their ear, a sharp rattle of the doorknob that no one touched. Some claim to hear his screams when the wind cuts through the street. Others insist the house is empty, that it is all just stories. Yet not a single soul has lasted inside longer than a night. Renters leave without explanation, their belongings abandoned. Contractors hired to demolish the structure quit before the first hammer falls. One man, bold enough to enter with a camera, was found unconscious at the threshold the next morning, his hair turned white, his eyes vacant, whispering a single phrase over and over, "I should have left." And so the house remains, untouched, rotting yet alive, an open mouth in the dark, waiting for its next visitor. Perhaps it waits for someone who thinks themselves stronger, someone who believes the warnings are nothing but superstition. Perhaps it waits for someone like you, for if you are reading this late at night, with only the glow of your screen to keep you company, you may already feel it, that heaviness in the air, that silence pressing against your ears. Listen closely. Do you hear it? The faint creak of a floorboard, the whisper curling at the edge of your hearing. Maybe it isn't just a story, maybe the house on Brookside Lane has found you too. And if you hear footsteps in the hall tonight, don't look back.